Okay, it's 9 o'clock, and we'll go ahead and get started with the staff developer meeting for March 2nd, 2021. This meeting can be viewed live on the Farragut YouTube channel, www.townoffarragut.org/livestream, or on Charter Channel 193 and TDS Channel 3. This meeting is being held virtually as authorized by Governor Lee's executive orders regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. We've got a couple of items on the agenda today. The first one is a discussion and public hearing on a preliminary plat for the Meadows on McPhee, 933 and 1013 McPhee Road. This has roughly 32 acres and 68 dwelling units. This is mostly the former Gibson Farm property, and then a part of the Seal property south of McPhee Park on the west side of McPhee Road. It was rezoned recently from agricultural to R1 OSR. This is the proposed layout, pretty similar to the concept plan that was taken to the Planning Commission a few months ago. It, as I mentioned earlier, has 68 dwelling units. There's 2 proposed access points onto McPhee Road. There is vehicular streets stubbed out into adjoining properties to the south and the north. So that's kind of an overview. There is, you can see, let me highlight this. The transmission line easement is running through here. That's a 100-foot easement, 100-foot wide easement. You can put streets and walking trails in those, although it has to be approved through LCUB, but no dwelling units can be within the easement itself. So this is kind of an open space area. And then they've got some open space around the periphery of the project. Let me show you some other slides here. We'll come back to some of these again. That's a little bit more detail. There's a couple of depressions. I'm not sure if they've been verified as sinkholes or not. We'll talk about that in a minute. There's one in this location here, and then one on the north end. Again, I'm not sure if they're actually sinkholes or not. This is the grading plan. Stormwater detention up near McPhee and in the back, in the kind of the southwest part of the property. And it's a little bit hard to see, but they have a streetscape plan that has street trees and a pretty heavy amount of landscaping along McPhee Road. It's a little bit hard to see. Those lot lines, unfortunately, are pretty faint on that particular image. And then the landscaping for the detention areas. So that's part of their streetscape plan. So just going back to, again, the purpose of the staff developer meeting is to really, we sent comments, staff comments to the applicant several days ago, and the purpose really of this meeting is to review any questions or comments or observations that the applicant may have with regards to the staff's comments. I'll point out some, at least in my opinion, some of the comments that may need to be discussed a little bit further. We are concerned about the proximity of roadways and sidewalks to, again, what appear to be depressional areas. They do technically meet the letter of the law, I guess, if you will. There's in the sinkhole ordinance, you have the sinkhole lip elevation, which in the case of this one, if it is a sinkhole, it's basically that. That's where you have closed contours. And then there's a 50-foot setback out from that sinkhole lip elevation within which no buildings can be installed. So it's kind of similar to an overhead transmission line easement. You can't have any houses in those. So that's kind of what that looks like. And you can see the street in this case is in the 50-foot. It's outside of the sinkhole lip elevation, although the grading seems to me would be challenging to not get in the lip there. But anyway, it's technically outside of that. The concern from the staff's perspective there with not only that street section but also down here is that these ultimately will be taken over by the town, these streets and sidewalks, and you know, you never know what could happen in the future, but if you know that there's potentially a depression near proposed public improvements, I mean, our advice would be to try to keep them as far away as reasonably possible. So that's one observation. Another is just that the trails, and I understand what applicant's doing here, but they've got kind of a trail out in space here that would connect to properties that surround this development when they're developed. And that's okay in and of itself, but it does need to be brought back into the project and connected internally as part of a larger walking trail system. Another comment that, let's see here, just basically having the pedestrian facilities connected internally, and then they can stub out to adjoining properties so that when those develop, that they can connect to the walking trail. Let's see if I've got a better image of one of the things, and I think the applicant's checking with the LCUB on this. I'm not sure where that stands, but the open space is not particularly functional. It's more just areas you can't do anything with, which can be a component of open space. We asked them to kind of explore, similar to what was done in Brookmere with an old driveway that became a walking trail, basically trying to use the Gibson's driveway, making it into a walking trail through the transmission line easement, and maybe coming back in to connect to the sidewalk system, and then kind of get, this trail, if this is where it ends up being, connected as well to the internal system as well as external. And that could, provide for loop options, and it also gives the open space kind of a functional and recreational component that it doesn't currently really have. So that's, let me see if there's anything else that I wanted to point out there. I'm not sure. I don't think so. We do need to see how the proposed access points relate to accesses on each side of McPhee Road that are existing to see whether a variance would need to be requested or not. McPhee's a minor arterial, and access points have to be at least 400 feet apart unless they request approval of a variance from the Planning Commission and the board. So that's kind of an overview of what we have right now on the project. Don't know if Russ or Daniel or any of you guys have anything you want to bring up or questions.
Yes.
Okay.
I've got a few questions on the comments I'll get to in a minute, but just to discuss a couple of things that you've already highlighted. A question, and we went through this, or I discussed this with you during the concept plan regarding the intersection spacing and whether or not that includes driveways, because obviously there's several driveways on the other side of the road with those individual lots, but there's no other roadway intersections along this section of McPhee Road. So I'll be glad to show the dimensions on it. They were on the concept plan. I thought that's where, at the point at which it was looked at, and so I didn't put them on the preliminary plat, but I can turn those back on resubmittal. But I guess that's a question for the town to try to figure out within their ordinance if intersection spacing with classification of roadway involves driveways, or if it just involves actual roadway intersections. The other thing I'll point out regarding the trails is I did hear back from LCB. They don't have a problem with the Greenway Trail in their easement, with the caveat that if they ever have to drive in their easement with their trucks to maintain their line, they're not responsible for any damage to a trail that's in their easement. So I think that's fair. It's their easement. They control it. We definitely can put a trail up through there. However, I would probably, it would create some interconnection through the middle, coming off the end cul-de-sac to the west, stubbing the Greenway Trail up to the north, and then eliminate that disjointed section to the south. And the pedestrian connection to the property to the south would be via the sidewalks that we have on the stub road going to the south, rather than getting down there and clearing more trees and more grading down there to try to put that in. Plus the grades off that end cul-de-sac to the south are fairly steep, so it would be difficult to get a trail up in there. And I think the opportunity in the future would be whatever happens to the property to the south in the future could definitely make their way back up the channel down there and connect our trail as I'll propose on the resubmittal coming off the end of the primary cul-de-sac. Regarding your concerns about the sinkholes, you're correct. Everything I've provided with the layout and with the grading plan meets your ordinance as far as no grading within the lip elevation and no structures within 50 feet of the lip elevation. However, I will point out regarding these, they are close contour depressions. There is not an observable open throat, if you will. There's no visible indication that they're active in any way. Certainly sometime in the last 10,000 years, something occurred there to create that, whether natural or man-made, but we will treat them as such and stay away from them within the measure of the ordinance. I did take your comments that you had about concern about maintenance of the sidewalks, and I flipped the sidewalks in those proximities to the opposite side of the road on resubmittal. It does add some extra pedestrian roadway crossings, but if it alleviates some of the town's concern by having the sidewalks opposite side of the roadway, then that's fine. And then I have some questions regarding the comments. And a general comment, I love the new digital format of submittal and getting comments, but if there's any way that you could add a comment number, it would make maybe things easier for me to address. But we'll start with what is on page 3. The comment at the top of the page from Bart Hose. It says it's a comment about one of the notes on the preliminary plat regarding setting the pins. We understand that the pins have to be set, and as we've done before, we've provided a letter of credit when we record the plat until the front pins are set, because generally we at that time until some of the other things occur, it doesn't make sense to put those pins in because they get knocked out, which is standard operating procedure everywhere. But he asked for, and what about other required monuments? And I'm not clear what other required monuments he's speaking of.
I guess on that, Russ, I was yeah, I think our allowance to, to accept the fact that you're, want to post a letter of credit and put the monuments in on the lots, you know, with the proper note on the plat is one thing, but any other monuments that might be required elsewhere in the subdivision, you know, that aren't related to the grading you're doing on the lots as you're building them should be set.
What other monuments are you speaking of besides lot corners?
Any of the other out of boundary corners, anything that you have to monument elsewhere in the subdivision, you know, just, you know, we accept that you're gonna be doing, grading on the individual lots, but any pins that can be set should be set.
Okay, well, that's fine. I was just concerned when you said other required monuments. I wasn't sure what you were speaking of. As it relates to a preliminary plat, obviously we'll just leave the note as is because it's a preliminary plat. It's not going before the board for final approval. And so at the preliminary stage, I think the note's fine. But we understand that the town requires a letter of credit to set the pins, any pins that aren't set at the time of plat recording. If we move on down to, I guess, well, I numbered all the comments. Let me find a way so I could try to keep them straight. I guess on page 7, Mark, there's a comment from you that says, as part of pre-construction, an arborist review may be required for select trees to ensure appropriate measures are taken to protect them. Is this just a general note, or is there something specific that you're alluding to there? I don't mind it as a general note if
No, it's
whatever
a general
trees.
note. Yeah, it's
Okay.
a general note, just in case something comes up during the pre-construction meeting and we want to have a tree looked at in a little more detail. It's just kind of a
Okay.
notice that that could be something that we would request. It may not, but it frequently does happen. It might be 1 or 2 trees that, you know, might need some extra expertise to, you know, develop a plan to save them.
These would be trees that are outside of the proposed disturbance area or along the edge of it.
Probably
you're
along
wanting
the
to make-
edge.
Okay.
Mhm.
The implication is if there's a tree in the middle where the road's going that all of a sudden you want to save it would, yeah. Okay.
No,
Well, I'm okay with that as long as
Yeah.
it, you know, just in general, I'm fine with that. I've got another comment on, I don't know if is Daryl on the line, or is the assistant town engineer on the line? I guess that's a no.
It should be, but I don't know. I'm not sure.
Well, I'll just throw this out there for the record, and we can address it. I thought his comment on page 9, which is the last page, second to last, he's talking about the design speed of the road. And we went through this at concept, and we discussed designing the roads since all the roads are dead end or loop streets. In other words, none of them are roads that are connecting a higher classification of road to a higher classification to a similar or higher classification of road than itself. That they'd be designed for 30 mile an hour AASHTO K values, which is what I did. And his comment is implying that the 2 main roads coming in should be designed to 35 miles an hour. The problem with that is that the K values get so enormous that changes everything, literally everything. The limits of disturbance, the grading, everything. And it also, you know, the larger the K value on residential streets, ultimately the flatter the road is, so the faster people drive. And it creates drainage problems in the sags because the sag curves get so long that in the low spot becomes very indiscrete. On higher classification, higher travel speed roads, it works fine because generally you have you either have a shoulder or you have more crown in order to find that low spot. So I'm I think I'm meeting the subdivision regulations because all of these roads are dead end or loop streets, which means they are required to be designed at 30 miles an hour, which is the way I have them designed. I guess if town staff wants to get with me and make a different argument to that, I need to do that pretty quickly in order to get the revisions resubmitted by Monday to move forward on the agenda. And that's I think that's the only questions I had about your comments, and the only comments I had in general about your overview of the project. I don't know, Daniel's on the line. Daniel, did you have any questions about the comments regarding the landscape or tree replacement plan?
Not at all. It was very clear. No
Okay.
questions here.
Okay. And I know Ryan Lynch, the surveyor, he had something come up and wasn't able to be on. Most of the plat comments are what we run into all the time with conflict between what the town of Farragut wants and what the utility companies and what general state practice is for preliminary and final plats, and we can address that when we resubmit with a response document, and then we can see where we go from there. Obviously, we do a lot of subdivisions out here, so we know how things ultimately go as it relates to final plats and securities, letters of credits, and stuff like that. So I appreciate y'all's time, and I'll be happy to answer any questions from the commission or the public or staff.
One thing, Russ, this is Mark again. The driveway thing, I apologize if there was not clarity on the front end with that, and it's not necessarily a big deal. You will need to request a variance because it's any access points, so driveways, streets, so anything that's within 400 feet on McPhee Road on either side, you'll have to request a variance from the driveways and other access ways ordinance on that.
Okay, so all those houses across the street, they have
Yeah.
they had to ask for a variance every time they put a driveway in?
Well, I don't recall, some of them are been there probably before the ordinance. So there's a joint access easement on some of the newer stuff.
Okay.
I mean, the bottom line is where you're proposing your two access points the best place for them and the safest place. And, if that's the case, then, the variance should be, approved. But it just would have to be, we'd have to see what that dimension is and then, note that you would need a variance in that regard.
And the planning commission grants the variance?
They review it, and then the board also reviews it, planning commission and the board. Now, depending on what you and Darrell talk about with his comment on the vertical curves, you may need to request a variance there. I mean, I don't know. That's really a discussion between you all. I'm not an expert on that, so I'll just leave it to you and Darrell working together on that one to make sure you're both on the same page there.
Mark and Russ, I am here now, so sorry about that. I could not find an invitation to the meeting. David was kind enough to forward that along.
Okay, were you on in time to hear my question about your comment?
I was
Or you
not,
just
Russ, sorry.
Okay. Your comment about the design, wanting these designed as if they were not dead end or loop streets. And when we talked back at concept, I designed them for 30 mile an hour because they are all dead end or loop. None of these roads are throughways that connect a higher classification road to a different higher classification road. So I don't understand why now you're wanting a 35 mile an hour design speed when these are not through roads.
Russ, I remembered a little bit of that conversation from back then, but it was more of a, I guess, a technical thing. If you need a variance, you need to request one.
Well, I don't believe I need one. Define how the road coming into a cul-de-sac is not a dead-end road.
Well, we have millions of those then. Some of them are 2,000 feet long.
Yeah.
May I ask a question, Darrell? Where are the requirements for design speed for neighborhood roads? Is it in our zoning ordinance? Is it in the subdivision regulations? Where is it?
Subdivision regulations.
That's in the subregs.
Okay, so this is, and I'm just throwing this out there because you all know how frustrated I have been with design speeds and fast roads in our neighborhoods. Is that something that we need to have a good discussion at the Planning Commission about, in light of the fact that Union Road has a design speed of 30 miles per hour as approved by TDOT, and that's a collector. I assume it's a minor collector, but it's certainly not a neighborhood street. So I'm not sure why we would be designing neighborhood streets with a higher design speed than we are a collector that we had requested a design exception for the speed because we knew we were going to have pedestrians on it, and bicyclists, which is why we got that design exception. So I think if this is an issue of our subdivision regulations really need to be addressed with regard to design speed and like lane width, and that's a long overdue discussion. So that's just my 5 cents. So.
Carol, this is the mayor. I agree with that. I think that's, I don't think a internal street needs to be held at a higher power as opposed to a street like Union Road.
Oh, I don't disagree.
But we need to address it at our subdivision regulations, correct, Darrell? That's what you're
Correct.
saying. He has to ask
That's
for
my
a
whole
variance
point.
because we haven't amended our subdivision regulations. So the planning commission needs to kind of get together on the changes that we need to make to bring our subdivision regulations up to the standards we've been implementing in recent years. So that's on us as a planning commission.
This is John Green. I have a comment here. I think what I'm hearing is the development regs require 35 miles an hour there. Is that what you're saying, Darrell?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And the
Except
proposal
for
is
dead-ends
for,
and loops.
and the proposal is for 30 miles an hour. So it sounds like the proposal is in conflict with the reg. I guess we need to resolve that. I think from what I'm hearing from Louise and from Ron, and personally for myself, 30 miles an hour is a better idea than 35 miles an hour. So I think we need to figure out how to get there from here. What's the, Mark, what's the path to resolve that? If we really do want 30 miles an hour, how do we get there?
Well, I mean, anytime if you have a provision that people are constantly requesting variances for, then you probably need to revisit the provision. So it
Yeah,
may be, and
that's the
I'm not
long
an
term.
expert. Yeah. I mean,
That's
the
the long term,
quickest,
but how about now?
well, in this case, they'd have to request a variance
Okay.
if there's a disagreement between, the town engineer and the applicant's engineer, and, the applicant would have to request a variance from that aspect of the subdivision regulations, and that could be completely handled by the planning commission.
So Russ,
Longer term.
Russ, I would suggest that you request a variance, and my gut feel is that probably would fly in the planning commission, because I don't, most of us who live in subdivisions here have speeding problems, so we're as residents of Farragut, we're for lower speed limits rather than high in a development.
Sure. Well, and further in your regulations, you require traffic calming for sections of road that are straight or relatively straight, and then at the same time you're wanting to design them basically much flatter than by going to 35 than 30. The definition of a dead end street is. You know,
That's a-
I agree. You need to go through your regulations because the vertical curve section talks about residential streets and dead end streets, but then the road section, the section talking about the right of way and the road section and width talks about local streets, local collectors. So maybe it's my fault interpreting things, but for now we'll just ask for a variance because I believe that 30 mile an hour makes much more sense for this, and the fact that we've already got a, you know, a plan together that's complete with drainage and everything else that is based on what I evidently was in error understanding at concept that 30 mile an hour was fine, because the approved concept plan has K values for 30 mile an hour roads, and so that moved right into design. So I'll ask for a variance. It sounds like the commission and the board are on board with a more reasonable design speed for these.
Well, I can't speak for all the commissioners, but it seems reasonable to me. And I think we have two problems. One is the problem for your next meeting to resolve, and that's the variance. And the longer term that Louise was talking about and Ron is to look at that that development reg, and get that fine tuned, I guess.
Yeah.
That's all I have.
Russ,
Okay.
Russ, you're not the first one to have that question about dead ends and loops. Unfortunately, our subdivision regs aren't particularly clear on that. I live on Butternut Circle. It's about 2 miles long and it's a loop. Does that mean it doesn't need to meet a 35 mile per hour sight distance? Well, no, not really, but it's a loop. So that argument can be made all over the place. Yes, we do have single entrance subdivisions all over town that may have a 3,000 foot long single entrance. That's a dead end. So the whole point of having the 35 mile per hour requirement is really for the sight distance. You're going to have people walking in the street. You're going to have pedestrians about, bicyclists, more so than you might on, say, Union Road. And I don't disagree with you on this, Russ. It's just a matter of, I don't know that short of a variance or a change to the subdivision regulations, I don't know how else to approve it otherwise.
Okay. Well, I'll ask for a variance.
Mark, this is John Green again. Should we add an agenda item for discussion on the long-term solution?
Well, I mean,
for the planning commission meeting?
certainly we could do that. It sounds like we might need to look, yeah, we could have something on there just for workshop discussion, because it sounds like we need to be more clear on what's a loop street, what's a dead end street, in relation to what, reality that we deal with. And so that Daryl's more clear on, it's more clear for him, and then and for the applicant, it's better for everybody if we maybe look at that, maybe look at how similar communities are defining those terms. And yeah, I mean, if it's okay with Daryl, because he'd be the one that would probably be the representative on this at the planning commission. So I don't want to speak for him, but it sounds like it's something we need to revisit. And there may be some other aspects of the subdivision regulations that are kind of low-hanging fruit that we might want to take a look at as well to get the regs more in line with the idea of slowing traffic in the town.
And Mark, and I'd like to add to that, because that has been something that I've been talking to about for some time. Our standards right now include 12-foot wide lanes as a standard, and a 40 mile per hour design speed as a standard on some of our roads. And I have advocated that we provide more flexibility. Now, 12-foot lanes and 40 mile per hour design speed may fit for some of our, like Virtue Road, which we know is going to be used as somewhat of an arterial, and the walking trails are, for the most part, trying to be set far off the road. But other areas, it doesn't make sense, and we need more flexibility built into those standards so that the town as a whole can plan and not have to deal with variances every time. We need that flexibility. So I agree that, yes, this needs to be looked at. I'm not sure that I support a workshop meeting right now, because I think we continue to do this piecemeal, and some of this needs to be, we need to look at the other aspects as well that have been sitting there for some time that need to be addressed. So maybe in a month or another month, where we have a more solidified list of things that we need to put together, look at the variances that have been requested in the past, to make sure that if we were seeing an excessive number of those, that we're addressing those as well. And certainly be cognizant that Darrell has a lot on his plate. So where can we fit this in? But it does need to be a discussion we have soon, because it has been sitting there for quite some time as a frustration of mine that we have not addressed our subdivision regulations for some time.
Well, I like the idea of maybe looking at it in April, as it is pretty short turnaround, and that gives us time to try to think it through a little bit more and see if there's other things that relate to that might need to be revisited as part of that workshop discussion. So I think that would be a better time frame to look at that, but maybe Darrell and myself and some other staff can get together and, you know, look at the existing language and see, you know, what we might want to bring up for discussion with the Planning Commission and engineers that we work with, you know, like Russ and Chris Sharp and others, get their feedback on it as well.
I think that would be helpful. I did have one question, Russ, for your access points, because I can't tell on here. Are they across from current driveways on on McPhee, or I can't tell from this.
Not, Ms. Pavlin, I'll have to go back and look. I don't have that pulled up right now. As I recall, they are not directly across from the driveways. The northernmost access would be the closest proximity to the driveways across the street. The southernmost access is there is not currently. I believe there's a couple of curb cuts across the street, but there's not currently any kind of driveway or anything attached to them. I think those are future lots of that small frontage subdivision across the street from this property.
Yes,
But,
and I know that some of those have shared access. We did.
Yep.
I can't remember if we subdivided down there, if we just subdivided north of the roundabout. I know that when we subdivided north of the roundabout, we did require shared access points. And it looks like there's some shared access points south of it, but I'd have to look at that in comparison to this.
Yeah, which I'll ask for, I'll ask for variances, but my MO is not to ever need variances. I try to follow to the best of my ability, all the regulations and ordinances, which is why I have no hair left. But to me, variances are another wild card, and I try to provide my clients a product that is approvable the first time through. So I'll definitely ask for the variances. Mark, I may call you. I've never asked for a variance. I don't know if you need what all you need, or if there's a separate form or fee or whatever. I'll email you and you can straighten me out on that. We don't need to take everybody's time on the technicalities of how to get a variance submitted. But yeah, I'll ask for them for the design speed and the intersection spacing, and then we'll go from there.
I think we're going to continue to run into that, Russ. I'm sure Fee Road, when it was first designed, was a local collector for just the houses on that street. Obviously, the front end of it, closer to Old Stage, has a ton of houses on it and they all have their own driveway access. So I'm not sure that it was envisioned when it was first built to be an arterial. I suspect the same could be said for Grigsby Chapel. With all the houses that are on that at once upon a time it was probably just a local collector, And as the things have grown around us, obviously we try to be connected, so that's what it's turned into. So I think that on some of these roads, you're gonna see that frustration. And I don't know how we address that from a subdivision regulations standpoint. When you do have access to the idea of a variance, requesting a variance, and we understand that these roads have evolved over time, so it's just one of those things we're gonna be hitting our heads against, as we develop out.
Mayor Williams, I think what we're looking at now, and it's going to be this way in the future, is this is just a very typical pocket piece of property that's just like Brass Lantern and some of the others that we're going to be running into. I mean, the last small pieces of property to develop are going to be facing pretty much the same situation because they are latter than what the regulations are that provide or that call out for the specific distance between curb cuts or driveways. So I think really we need to do something to look at this. Or if not, then you're going to have pieces of property that's going to be landlocked because it can't be developed. So it's, you know, based on that particular ordinance itself. So I do think we need to start looking at this because we have a lot of these pieces like this that are left that Russ, or well, Bob and some of the others will pick up on and start to develop. And if we don't look at it now, then we're going to be faced with this type of conversation many more times down the road. One other thing I've got is on the sinkholes that are near the roads and sidewalks. We need to really look at that for sure. The way Mark drew that, it looks like the road would be, you know, into that lip area. What we do not need is another farm at Willow Creek type of situation. And so I think we really do need to look at those two spots. I mean, I know that one right there that Mark's drawing on, it might be a little bit difficult without killing a lot. But the other one down there may be able to move away from it just a little bit if it actually falls into a circle. I think I see the circle drawn there, but again, I do not want to see another farm at Willow Creek situation, you know, 5-10 years down the road like what we had with that deal. So that's my only comments. Oh, one more. That walking trail that goes to nowhere, starts in nowhere and goes to nowhere. I think if you have one internally along the, I guess along the easement, and it ties into the sidewalk, I think that's sufficient. That right there, I mean, you could tie it into that cul-de-sac to the north, but to the south, the only thing you could possibly do to tie it in would be to run it down parallel to the property line and hook in with the sidewalk that's on that road, that stub road. And I don't know if that's really beneficial because it really does not connect other than just internally. And that's all I've got.
Thank you.
Any other commissioners or board members or anyone else have any questions or comments on this item? Okay, well, we'll just look for the revisions by midnight on Monday. Russ, you've got till midnight.
All right, we'll have.
I'll be waiting at 12:01 to start reviewing. So.
No, we'll have them. We'll have them. No problem by then. So I've already started making the trail and sidewalk revisions and the stuff that we're not questioning at all. So I appreciate everybody's time. Have a great day.
All right,
Thank you, Russ.
Mark, when are the comments due by?
Next Monday at midnight.
Okay, so that's for everything that needs to be on the planning commission agenda?
Yeah, that's for resubmittals that would have related to previous planning commission items like the rezonings.
Okay,
Those are also due on Monday.
okay, thank you.
We'll see what happens. I haven't gotten anything on those yet.
Okay, so if we don't receive anything by Monday, by midnight, they will not be on the planning commission agenda, correct?
That's right.
Thank you.
That's right. Yep. All right, we'll take a little break and start on the second and final item at 10 o'clock. Okay, this is Mark Shipley again. We resume our staff developer meeting. This is the second and last item on the agenda for today. And this particular item will be a workshop discussion because it's a text amendment request to Chapter 4 of the zoning ordinance in the site plan regulation section. Currently, in that section of the zoning ordinance, garbage dumpsters and recyclable containers are required to be screened with a permanent structure that's architecturally compatible with the principal structure or the main building on the property. So that's why you have in the town all these enclosures around garbage containers, and the veneer of those enclosures is to be compatible with the primary materials that's used on the principal building. So if you have a brick building, which is most of our newer buildings, they have typically a brick veneer enclosure. So what the applicant is requesting at this time, and I think they're present here on the call, that they can talk through what they're specifically looking for. But what they're asking for is, this is a kind of I guess, a new approach to refuse collection. It's partially above ground and partially below ground, you can see on the screen. And it basically, what they're asking for is to not, if somebody chooses this type of newer approach, which is kind of, it has an in-ground component, that the requirement to provide an enclosure around the garbage container not be required. They could choose to do that if they want, but not be required, and basically in lieu of that, allow them to use plant material, evergreen material, or whatever is ultimately approved by the Planning Commission and potentially the VRB to be used for the screening of that particular site component. The reason for this request is that from the applicant's perspective, and they can talk through this more than I can, but is when given the requirement to, these are probably going to be a little bit more expensive to use the newer technology that has an above ground and below ground component. And if we also require an enclosure, an architecturally compatible enclosure around this, that they will just choose to go with the traditional above ground refuse container. We don't, of course, allow a situation like what you see there on the screen on the left, not unless it's a very old property that predates the town. But we've required the enclosure around garbage containers for many years to, again, screen them and hide them and blend them in with the area. That's also something that's talked about in our architectural design standards. And, generally the placement of refuse collection on a property, in addition to the screening, needs to be thought of at the site layout stage so that it's in as discrete a location as possible. So that kind of gives you an idea of what in cross section this would look like. I don't know of any personally that I've seen. There are some communities in the area that do have these. I think Oak Ridge and Alcoa, I believe, was on the list provided by the applicant in their request. This is kind of, again, some other images. These are a little over 4 feet tall, above ground part. Again, what they're requesting is, in a case like these, you wouldn't have the traditional solid enclosure that matches the architecture of the building, but they could instead enclose it with, some dense landscaping material. So that if someone chose this more expensive option, that they wouldn't have the additional expense of constructing an enclosure. And these are some other images. Again, there is an above ground aspect to this. These are apparently leak proof, and are, you know, just a more sanitary approach than what currently have in garbage collection. So there's some environmental benefits to this approach. But again, these images that we're seeing here, the containers are pretty much completely unscreened, which would be very different from anything that we've dealt with in the town in a long time. So let's see, just showing you some of these to get so you have an idea of what these look like. And here's what one looks like when it's pulled out of the ground. You can see that a fair amount of it's below ground as well as above ground. And any garbage container, garbage truck can service these. You don't need any special truck to use this as an option. And I think that's the last slide that I have. The applicant is, I believe I saw, there he is. Okay, Greg Carmichael. I may just turn it over to Greg and he can explain what the request is and what they're looking for. Again, this would just be for workshop discussion purposes only with the Planning Commission. I guess just an initial reaction from the staff's perspective is, you know, we would definitely want to see screening retained. We don't want a situation like I've seen on virtually all these pictures where these containers are completely unscreened. That would not work from the staff's perspective. Now, whether the Planning Commission, if somebody chose this as an option, that they would allow a less expensive screening option, that's really something to be discussed with the Commission and ultimately the Board, Mayor and Alderman. So that's kind of an overview of this, and I guess I'll turn it over to Greg if you want to elaborate a little bit further on this and give us some context.
I appreciate that, Mark. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir. Uh-huh.
All right, good, cool. Yeah, very well put. Thank you for that. From my perspective and the screening question, I did make it a bit of an attempt to write some language based on your current language in the current code and what I thought might be acceptable. And to your point, yes, we are not asking for no screening. While there are some municipalities that do allow, as you've seen in those pictures, mostly we put those pictures in just so you can see the containers better. I probably should put some in there with some screening around them, some landscape screening. But that is essentially the conversation we had with the city of Knoxville when they changed their code last year, or they amended the code last year to allow for these containers. Same with Nashville. But I guess a little bit of the back history, long way back, in-ground waste containment really started in Europe, probably in the mid-'80s, and then kind of worked its way into Canada. So one of those bigger companies in Europe brought the concept into Canada, and that's actually where this product kind of got its footing. But what Europe does and what Canada started with, they use it would be a specialized truck in the U.S. 'cause it's like a crane truck, and they pick the container up out of the ground, swing it over the truck, and it dumps out the bottom. So when we kind of went to reinvent this, we thought, well, we're going to try to make something that works with kind of the regular North American garbage truck, because you're not going to get all the municipalities and waste managements of the world to go out there and buy all new equipment just to service in-ground containers. So That's kind of why we went with the design we went with. But I guess back to the request at hand, that is just what we were asking for, is that we allow for landscape screening, because the product itself installed is about probably $9,000 to $11,000 container and installation. Where a big masonry trash enclosure usually starts off close to 20 grand. And if it's required to be covered, which some of them are, then obviously it can go up to there. They can get into, $40,000-$50,000 into some of those. So that's, all told, it's a lot less expensive in the overall investment. But if we had to, of course, enclose it with a full masonry enclosure, no contractor's going to do that. They'll just go back with a traditional big ugly box, we call them on our end.
Okay, do you have anything else you want to mention on that, or?
I don't know. I did submit a bit of different information. Some of the, I think there was a little bit of a document in there called the Logic, which sort of touches a little bit on the sustainability points in that of, kind of the things we say in communities, and just about every community across the country has a lot of the same goals as far as, making a nice family atmosphere and making our towns look nice, and then bringing out the natural beauty and those kind of things, which we feel like we do. At the same time, we want to address all the old kind of dumpster issues, because you can take a dumpster and put it inside an enclosure and we don't see it. And that's fine. And enclosures, a lot of times, in like Farragut's requirements are, they're nice enclosures. But they only actually address that one issue. A little bit of, they do address illegal dumping to some degree if they're kept locked. But as far as, general illegal dumping, dumpster diving, pest and vermin, runoff from the dumpsters, and everyone knows that even inside the enclosures, a lot of times the lids get left open on them. They don't seal very well. And so the rainwater gets in and it runs out the little drain hole in the back of the dumpster. And it goes to, if there's a drain on the dumpster pad, that goes to sanitary, that's fine, but a lot of them don't. And, they end up in stormwater and wherever. So we do address all those issues. And illegal dumping perspective, you can kind of see on that the picture it's on the right now, there's a kind of a smaller lid, and that's meant to keep out the mattresses and the tires and the couches, sofas, and all those kind of things end up, especially if you're in a multi-family area, and a lot of commercial retail, they'll end up with those issues. But when the truck dumps the container, that whole main lid, the kind of that domed part, actually opens up. It's got gravity locks on the inside, so you can't just walk up to it and open it and put big things in there. But as soon as the truck tips it, those latches flip down and it releases the main lid. So that's kind of what it does, more on the community side, and what it does particularly for property managers and people like that have to deal with a lot of those other issues.
So Greg, this is Mark. So that little, the smaller opening, if I'm working in a restaurant and it's the end of the shift and I'm taking the trash out, I can just lift that up and drop it in there, right?
That's right.
As easy as that. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, and those lids are about the same size as those big tote bins that the city, normally the solid waste departments use. So yeah, you can get big trash bags in there, but the idea was to restrict the other bigger items. So and two more things. So one reason that the big main lid stays locked, and those smaller lids we call the feed doors, when they don't open past 90 degrees, so they always fall shut. So that's part of the way we control the odor, not just because they're shut, which is obviously helps control it, but it doesn't allow a lot of the rainwater and the elements in. That also drives the bacteria growth, which creates the smell. And that's the other reason for them being below grade, because it keeps that temperature cooler. So there's, it may be in that presentation that I attached, but I have a slide anyway that kind of shows the growth curve of bacteria growth. And at, you know, at 35, 38 degrees where you keep your refrigerator, you get very little bacteria growth. That's why we put it there. But you get up to about like 60, and 60, 65 is about where this ground temperature is going to be. You still don't get a lot of growth, but once you hit about 85, 90, 110, it's like an exponential scale, and bacteria will double at 100, 105 degrees. Bacteria will double every 20 minutes. So it's kind of the reason when you throw out a box of chicken wings or something in a garbage can on the back sidewalk, and the next day you can't walk past it. That's what's happening, because it's spoiling so fast. So we reduce, of course it's kind of hard to put a number on it, but we reduce odor by about 90% in this type of container, just because it's kept cool and kept drier.
In the city of Knoxville and the city of Oak Ridge, you mentioned those two communities. What did they have to modify their requirements, and then if they did, what did they end up going with?
The city of Oak Ridge, I think they never had updated their requirements, so they weren't requiring masonry enclosures. They may have done it in a review or an architectural review, but I did get an email back from them telling us that they had no difficulty with this, and that they wouldn't require an opaque or a masonry enclosure. So theirs was a little different, and partly because the lady I was working through with there was from Greenville, South Carolina, which Greenville almost requires in-ground waste containment at this point. There's quite a lot of it down there, Greenville and Spartanburg. But anyway, she was from there, so she got it pretty quick. But the city of Knoxville, before Gerald Green retired, he helped us work through it early last year. And so they just wrote an amendment to the code because they'd just redone all the code. So they wrote an amendment to it. And I forget just the exact language, but I could send it to you. And basically, Nashville used that as a boilerplate for theirs. So all Nashville, Metro. Yes, I definitely have a web link to Nashville's. I just can't remember where I have Knoxville's, but I can find it.
Okay, yeah, I haven't done any research on that yet, but that could be useful. I could put that in the planning commission's packet for the meeting on the 18th, so that they have some reference of how other communities nearby are dealing with this issue. I mean, to me, there's clearly benefits to this approach. So, I mean, the smell and the stormwater benefits would seem to me to be pretty substantial. But again, we've always really, provided for screening of these kind of structures on sites, and I don't certainly think we want to discontinue that. We'll just have to figure out with the planning commission and the board how they want to deal with this, if they even want to change it.
Yep.
With that, are there any planning commissioners or board members that have any questions or?
Yeah, Mayor
comments at
Williams.
this point? Okay, yes, sir.
I agree on the stormwater and what the benefits, but looking at the man standing there beside this enclosure is obviously quite a bit shorter. If you're going by what that rendition gives you. But my concern is, if I look at either one of these containers, that obviously one on the left's not in Farragut, but the problem being on both of these is there's, without some sort of a enclosure like we have now, you've got no real way to do planting around it. I mean, unless you did it in pots, because you're pretty much surrounded by a concrete and asphalt. So I don't know that. I mean, I guess maybe there are certain areas where you could put one that you could have just the front of it open. But to me, all this does is it just means a shorter wall height. That's all I can see that's going to be, because I mean, without a way to plan around it, then you can't leave it the way it is there on the right. It's going to have some sort of enclosure. And of course, if you've got a gate on, or a door on the front of it to keep people out of it, that's fine. You just have to, open it up to where the trash man can get in there. But all I can see here is that it's shorter, so it would be just a shorter wall around the container. I mean, physically looking at it, that's what you would see. I mean, the other pluses are, which he's described, are fine, and I agree with, but I don't know that, and I'm not real sure how you would keep the water out of that down below. I know you'll keep it dry on the inside because the lid's closed, but water will, unless it's got some sort of drainage, that hole would have water that would build up in it. And then you would end up setting that back down into the water. If we had a big rain event, then you would have a lot of water down in there, because it don't appear to be any sort of seal that would seal it off. So anyway, that's my concerns. Thank you.
This is John Green. To follow up on that, I've noticed that some of the commercial businesses in our town don't do a terrific job of maintaining their landscape. So I'd be reluctant to depend on landscaping around these for enclosures. If we did, we'd have to have some sort of maintenance program to make sure everybody's got maintaining their enclosure. So I'd just offhand, the landscaping trees or bushes around there doesn't sound like a solution for us. Perhaps there is a much smaller profile barrier that would be required, as Ron said. It looked like they're a much smaller unit, and maybe there's some other options that would be a little easier than what we have now. But I guess I would be against, right offhand, the landscaping enclosure. Thank you.
Any other commissioners or board members have any comments on this? Yeah, I mean, looking at, just from my perspective, the landscaping is always a challenge because it's really dependent on, it's easier to have a maintenance failure with landscaping than a structure. And maybe looking at the height of the structure in relation to that garbage disposal structure might be something that we could look at, so that, as you've all stated, the enclosure wouldn't be as substantial as you would find in a regular garbage container, but it would still basically screen the structure. It just wouldn't be as tall, and it would provide for basically a permanent screen that you wouldn't have to worry about if it were to die and not get properly replaced, or when it got replaced it was small material that took a while to grow, and then it was visible for a pretty long period of time. So, I mean, that would cut a little cost in having a smaller enclosure as opposed to what, you would expect on an above-ground structure. So that may be something that we could talk about with the planning commission a little bit more. But yeah, I've got a little bit of concern about just using landscaping in and of itself, because there are issues with that approach. We've found out with HVAC screening in the past, for example, that hasn't always been a good way to deal with it. Does anybody have any other comments or thoughts?
Just one more question, if I could, Mark.
Yeah.
And I don't remember when I looked at the code, do you require a roof over those
No.
enclosures? Okay. I know some in Farragut have done it. I know the Chick-fil-A did, and I didn't know if that was code or not.
No,
municipalities
it's
do.
not. That's just something that the entity chose to do, and Chick-fil-A is actually in the city of Knoxville, but we don't currently require that. That's one benefit, obviously, to your system is that it is covered. And as I mentioned earlier, to me, there's a lot of advantages to looking at this as an option, from odor and stormwater in particular benefits.
And I did want to address the mayor's concern on the water getting into the container.
Mhm.
So we've had these out for about 8 years, and we've we've kind of been through all the hard spots, I think. But generally, well, I shouldn't say I don't know of any situation where we're getting water in there because there's a bit of a lip that comes up above the concrete pad. That you can't see it very good in this little cutaway, but you can probably more on the actual drawings. Anyway, there's about a 4.5-inch lip. Actually, in that picture where the waste management truck was dumping it, back there, you can see it quite a bit better. But that so that lip kind of keeps out the just any groundwater running in. But when that container is sitting on the lip, it weighs about 650 pounds, and it actually creates a seal around there. So that, if you were in the low end of a parking lot for some reason, you got a bit of water pushing up against it, it probably won't breach that. If it were an actual flood event, yeah, it's likely it would get in there in a flooding event. But we haven't had any issue with that. We got about close to 2,000 of these in the ground now, so. We have.
This is John Green again. I think the concept is really a good concept, and we, as the town of Farragut and the planning commission, should do what we can to encourage this. But we got to try to match it with our aesthetic requirements, and hopefully we can get costs down where it's feasible for people to use this concept. So my opinion is that we ought to be working toward this concept, but we can't forget our aesthetics here. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions, comments, observations on this? Greg, you have anything else to add?
No, I don't think so. I appreciate you guys making the time. And is there anything else that I need to do before the next meeting? Sorry, I haven't been through this process before here.
Well,
So,
if you found any communities you deal with that require a constructed screen that maybe is a hybrid of traditional versus a little something better than just relying solely on landscaping, but maybe if there's any communities that have worked with y'all on that, that might be useful. Or just, if you got Oak Ridge or City of Knoxville's, what they ended up coming up with, we can certainly include that for the planning commission to be aware of and think about.
I would recommend that that you try to include a better drawing showing that lip, because I think the rainwater issue certainly will come up at the meeting. So if you've got a better drawing or depiction or rendition or whatever that shows that, that might be helpful to you.
There may be. I didn't, I just picked a few select slides for this PowerPoint. There may be some things in their submittal. They had quite a bit of information in there. And I'll double check, but if that's not in there, if you could get that, Greg, that would be useful. You can kind of see
Yeah, I can-
a little bit right here on this image, where it protrudes above the ground. And basically that, that heavy, dumpster container basically sits on that, and just by the weight of it, pretty much keeps everything out. But, so yeah, that would be useful if we don't have that. I just don't recall.
Yeah, I think they're kind of embedded in one of those big files, but I'll attach them as
Okay.
separate files. Yeah, they're pretty simple.
I'll include
do
everything
that,
that
too.
you submitted in the packet. I just picked a few slides for today, but we'll include all the information with the packet. If you could try to get that by next Monday, then I'll just include that with what you submitted originally, and that way the Planning Commission and others will have, everything that you want them to see ahead of time.
Certainly, thanks. We'll do that.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Yes, Mayor Williams. I think something I would have, since you have 4 engineers sitting on the planning commission, typically engineers like to see dimensions. In other words, what's the envelope down below, what's the envelope above, that type of thing. Because right now you look at it and say, well, it's about this tall, the tire's about that tall, and it's a little bit higher than that. Looks like it's maybe time and a half down in the ground. Is that a 6-foot diameter hole and a 5 3/4 diameter container that goes down in the hole? I think some dimensions would be helpful. That's all.
Greg,
Yeah,
Greg?
they did include a specification sheet in their submittal. I just didn't include it in today's packet, but it's got a lot of that detail in there, and that will be in the full submittal.
Greg, this is John Green. Is there just one size of this unit, or do they come in different sizes?
So far, we've just have one size of the in-ground. We have the exact same container in an above-ground version that just sits on the ground. Mostly for in like organics for restaurants and that, because organic food waste is so heavy. They actually to fill up 6.5 yards of that would be extremely heavy. So and they don't have that much, so it dumps more often. So we do it for that reason. And sometimes, like the city of Knoxville has 3 or 4 of these downtown. They're trying to get rid of those trash corrals they have around downtown. If you've ever been to those restaurants on Market Square, there's some around there. Kind of at the end, there's a little thing called Wall Avenue between there and the TVA buildings, and they're the challenge there is they can hardly get the truck into it, so they haven't done anything yet. But we've done several down the old city where they're just actually sitting on the ground where those trash corrals used to be, because those things get really, really nasty inside. There's bins get dumped over, and there's a lot of bees and things flying around in the summer. And so it's cleaned up those, but we're still working on some better solutions uptown near Market Square and that.
All right, anybody else have anything? Okay, well, we'll have this on the March 18th Planning Commission meeting for a workshop discussion, and we'll take it from there and see what the rest of the planning commission says, and hopefully give you some good feedback and move forward. So I believe that concludes the staff developer meeting for March 2nd. And we'll see you all on the 18th.
Thank you, Mark.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Okay. Yep.
Yep. Mark, send me that drawing if you don't mind. Or email it to me, Bart or Mark, whoever's still on the line.
Okay, it's Greg here. I shared it actually just as Mark was hanging up.
Yeah, if somebody can send me a copy, I'd like to print that out and look at it. Get some idea of the spacing. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
After you found out everything was okay there? Oh. Well, he wasn't gonna call you. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah.